Alrighty, welcome to The Accidental Homeschooler with your hostess, Sam Sorbo. And this is my book, They're Your Kids, which you can get at samsorbo.com. Today we're going to talk about different homeschool methods. And so I just decided to do a rundown of the different methods of homeschooling because I thought maybe as an accidental homeschooler, you needed to have a picture of what homeschooling might be like for you. So there are so many different ways of homeschooling, and in fact, most homeschoolers do a combination of different ways. It's like a smorgasbord, and the key with a smorgasbord is you figure out what's the thing that you really want, or the three things that you really want, and then maybe take a taste of some other things, but focus on the stuff that's really important that you really like. At least that's the way I go about it. Okay, so I'm just going to run these down. The first one I want to talk about is the classical homeschooling. So classical or classical Christian homeschool is it's basically the way that people have been learning since the Middle Ages. It centers on the trivium, which is grammar, logic, and rhetoric, or grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. And it's the way that I chose to home educate because when I read a couple of different books when I first started, and tomorrow we're going to talk about books. So I get that out there. When I started reading about home education, it was the method that really just appealed to me the most because it makes the most sense to me. So the idea is that children are like parrots. Children mimic everything, and and it's actually called the pole parrot phase, where they mimic everything. They repeat everything, and in fact, young kids, when they're first learning to talk, apparently they just make all kinds of sounds that they eventually hone into actual language. I remember when I was a little girl, I memorized every TV commercial that I ever saw, which obviously meant that I watched too much TV. But the point is, your kids are able to memorize a whole bunch of stuff. And that's why there's a lot of memorization in the grammar phase that may not make a lot of sense to an adult because we're like, oh my gosh, to memorize all of that. But to a kid, they love to memorize. So give your kids good things to memorize, like Bible verses, or the Gettysburg Address, or the periodic table, or things that eventually one day actually might be useful instead of you asked for it, you got it, Toyota, you know, weird things that are useless because they will be memorizing something. And so you have the opportunity to give them that something to memorize. So after grammar comes the logic phase or the dialectic phase. And the dialectic phase is where you take the grammar, and the grammar are the pieces of, okay? The pieces of learning. You take that grammar and you start to figure out how it works together. And you start making equations or sentences or thoughts. And you're wrestling with the thoughts. That's why it's called the dialectic. Because you really start to wrestle with the thoughts. And as children move into the teen years, they start contending. They start having instead of why is the sky blue, right? And the incessant questions that the children have because they're just trying to fill in pieces in their data banks. The question becomes, how did the sky become blue, and how would it change colors, and how does it change colors, and questions about God, questions about why we're here on Earth, those kinds of questions. This is a great age to start answering and delving into those kinds of questions. Now, a quick aside: parents are really concerned typically with how do I have a God conversation with my child? I'm not even that much of a God person. but I believe in God, but it's not like I read the Bible every day. Best answer I can give you is you should pay more attention to that. You should have those conversations with your child, because if you don't, the culture we are in today will win and your child will be lost. So it's not enough that you sort of have this, foundational belief in God. The evidence is available to you. Read Mere Christianity, one of the seminal works out there. Read the Screwtape Letters. Fantastic book, very enjoyable. It's fiction, so it's fun. In a weird way, it's fun. It's a very enjoyable book, and it talks. It delves into. It doesn't talk about it, but it wrestles with, because of the characters in the book. It wrestles with good and evil, and God. But through fiction. So it's very enjoyable. Anyway, there are some great resources out there. There are fantastic videos on YouTube. You can explore these things with your child online. So, but we're talking about methods of homeschooling, and that figures into one of the methods. If there's something that you need to, converse with your child about, and you feel completely incompetent, as we often do, you say, you know what, let's go look up. What are the, I think there are 7, I can't remember, basic apologetic lines of reasoning. In fact, John Lennox talks about that. We were talking about this, and he said, the atheist says, this is very cruel what coronavirus is doing in this world right now. This is a very cruel time, and a good God would never let that happen. Therefore, God doesn't exist. But then you're still left with the problem of suffering. And if this is evil, where's your metric for evil? If God doesn't exist, then there's no metric. Therefore, evil doesn't exist. Therefore, there is no evil. So your whole argument that there is no God falls apart. Like, ooh. And then the atheist's head goes, okay. After the dialectic is the rhetoric. I'm spending a lot of time on classical because that's what I do, and this is I love this one. I love it. Then there's the rhetoric. What is the rhetoric? The rhetoric is the ability to express. Rhetoric is spoken, right? What better way to know that you have learned something than to be able to teach it? And that's what rhetoric really is. And so you get the grammar. So let's talk about buying a house. You never bought a house before. You had no idea how to buy a house. You never took a course on how to buy a house. But you did intrinsically know, well, there's some stuff I have to learn. Like, what does APR mean? What is escrow? I need an agent. That's a basic building block to put things together. I probably need a lawyer. I need to talk to a banker about a mortgage or a loan, right? That's what a mortgage is. It's a loan. And so these are your pieces. That's your grammar. And then the dialectic is, how does the grammar fit together? Well, the agent shows me the house, and then we put it into escrow, and the lawyer deals with the escrow, and the bank comes in to finance, and right? And then pretty soon you can tell people, this is how I bought my house. That's rhetoric. And you just went through the whole trivium all by yourself without an instructor. Oh, but the realtor told me blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but the realtor only can tell you so much. They're not an instructor. They're only helping you with this part. You instructed yourself by going and talking to the realtor. Okay. The classical homeschooling uses 5 tools: reason, record, research, relate, and rhetoric. And that's basically classical. Classical Christian relates everything to God. So I do classical conversations, which is a classical, actually, I think I'm wearing their t-shirt, classical conversations. This is not a paid ad. And they relate everything to God as if as if the whole world were on a wheel, and the spokes of the wheel all go into the center of the wheel, and the center is God. And I love looking at life that way because God's in charge. Okay, so that's classical. Now let's talk about the school at home approach to homeschooling. School at home is probably the most popular one that you'll see in the media, because then they get a cute photo of the kids at the table doing schoolwork. Incidentally, when I started promoting coronavirushomeschooling.com, and I've done 25 interviews already in the past week, probably more. When I first started promoting it, they said, oh, for the promotion, it would be great if we had pictures of you like homeschooling your kids. And I thought, every day is homeschooling, and I don't have any pictures of every day. Like, that's just weird. So I could send pictures of the zoo or the train place that I used to take the kids because they just loved looking at the miniature train going around the track. But I don't have pictures of us sitting at the table. Okay, we're doing our school now. Even though we did. But the classical school at home approach is like my girlfriend, who took a whole room out of her house and painted it, and painted one end as a blackboard. They have that blackboard paint, and she got the little desks for the kids, and so they sat at their little school seat desk contraption things. Don't do that. Yes, it has the advantage is that you've basically taken your school curriculum and you've brought it home. But the disadvantage is it's a lot more work. It's a much heavier burden because you're trying to recreate something you're recreating an idea of something that and according to some people, it's the method that fails the most. Because the parents are like, ugh, why am I going through all this when I could just send the kid to school and get the same thing, right? So take advantage instead of the opportunity of home education to do it differently. There are so many advantages to doing it differently, and there are so many drawbacks to what the schools produce now. Excuse me. Okay. Let's go to relaxed or eclectic homeschooling. This one is probably pretty popular. Basically, you use a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you use workbooks for math or for reading or for spelling. You use other books for other stuff. You might take some classes outside the home. It's a little bit less formal. That's, I suppose, if you don't want to do too much work on this, then you could just grab the curriculum and input the stuff that you want and make it sort of eclectic. But it is more relaxed, which is better because you don't want the stress. You don't need the stress. The stress doesn't serve you. Okay, there's unschooling. Oh my gosh. Okay, so the first time I saw unschooling, I went to a park day, and there was a gal there who was an unschooler. I was like, oh, what's that? And she's like, well, we do school wherever, and I don't really guide anything that the kids study. They study whatever they want at any time. And I'm like, what about math? She goes, you're going to ask me what about math? And I said, yeah, because at that point I hadn't even started homeschooling yet. And I was like totally oppressed by the burden of trying to replicate school by myself, right? So I was in a completely different mindset. But my first question was, what about math? Not socialization, strangely, not strangely. And she said, well, the way I figure it is, if he decides to go to college, he'll learn the math that he needs to then. And I was like, wow. Now, I remember back in 7th grade, was it 7th? No, 6th grade. I was going into middle school, and they had decided to put me into 7th grade advanced math. But I knew a couple kids who were going into 8th grade advanced math, which was algebra. And I was disappointed because I didn't want to take pre-algebra. I wanted to go into algebra because I really liked math, and I was a math whiz, and I wanted to do that. And my mother said, well, just do the pre-algebra book over the summer, and then you can test into algebra if you want. So I did. Over the summer, I would sit down for an hour and do a whole bunch of problems in pre-algebra. I did the entire book. I mean, I was a workhorse, and I tested into algebra. And I think my point with that is, at a certain age, you can learn all the math you want like that, like really fast. So there is something to be said for this idea that, well, when the time comes, if they need it, they'll learn it. I tend to disagree. I think that it's good for kids to have a little bit of structure and a little bit of responsibility and stuff. So I'm not a huge fan of unschooling, but it's definitely an option for you. And so you need to define education for you, your kids, your family. You need to define it. And if it looks like unschooling, there's a great TED Talk that's got, like, I don't know, 64 million views, of this 13-year-old who he calls it hack schooling. So he just goes online to learn whatever he wants. And he says that his learning takes place, at the library, at home, at a coffee shop, out in the community. Not anymore, because we're not allowed out in the community. But the idea is learning takes place wherever you are, if you're inclined to learn. So John Holt is the teacher and the founder. He's a school teacher, but he was the founder of the unschooling movement. And he wrote a book called What Do I Do on Monday? And he said this: we can see that there is no difference between living and learning, that living is learning, that it is impossible and misleading and harmful to think of them as being separate. We say to children, you come to school to learn. We say to each other, like as educators, our job in school is to teach children to learn. But the children have been learning all the time for all of their lives before they met us. What's more, they're very likely to be much better at learning than most of us who plan to teach them something. And I think while I'm not a huge fan of unschooling, I think there's something very, very important in understanding that. That our education system has basically brainwashed us to think that learning happens inside the institution. And that's dangerous, because it's patently untrue. It's just patently untrue. Do they do it on purpose? No, I don't think it's on purpose. I know, I will say this, the founder of this is Fichte, who was the head of philosophy and psychology at Prussian University. And this is the thought that influenced our entire public school movement at the time. Education should aim at destroying free will so that after pupils are thus schooled, they will be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. When the technique has been perfected, every government that has been in charge of education for more than one generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need of armies or policemen. And that's in my book. And I believe them. I take them at their word. All right, so we talked about unschooling. We have a couple more. Charlotte Mason is a name that you'll hear bandied about. They believe children aren't just containers waiting to be filled with knowledge, but they're persons in their own right, deserving of respect. So they give them time to play, time to create. They get them involved in like real life situations from which they can learn. They're really big into nature walks and visits to art museums and geography, history lessons and literature from living books or books that make those subjects come alive. That's sort of their approach. You can do more research online if you want. That's Charlotte Mason. Then there's Waldorf, which is another one that's kind of along the same lines as Charlotte Mason. It was based on the work of Rudolf Steiner, who sort of stressed the importance of educating the whole child. So body, mind, and spirit. These are very sort of touchy-feely, feel-good things. They've been very successful for some people. In early grades for Waldorf, they stress a lot of arts and crafts, music and movement, and nature. Older children, they focus on self-awareness, how to reason things out for themselves. It's kind of hippie to me, but a lot of people, it's grown in popularity. There are Waldorf schools around. Children in a Waldorf homeschool typically don't use standard textbooks, and they instead create their own books. So that's a whole other thing. That's all I'll say on that. Then there's Montessori homeschooling. And I did Montessori a little bit. When you see Montessori schools here in the United States, I'm sure they're doing the best they can, but they can't be truly Montessori because typically the restrictions placed on them from the government prohibit what Montessori herself called the 3-hour work period. And the belief there, and she was a teacher who was she was supposed to study the kids who were home all day when their parents were off working. This is over in Italy. And so she studied them, and she discovered that basically they had a 3-hour work period. So to liken it to your work day, you start at 9, you pick something that's pretty easy to do, and you get it done. You're like, well, I can get that done really fast. And you do that because it gives you a sense of accomplishment, an achievement, right? You've done it and it's done. And then you take a coffee break. About 10 o'clock, you take a coffee break, and then you work the remainder of the 3-hour work period till noon or 12:30, right? And you do the hard stuff. Well, what happens in Montessori, and children will do this too. So they'll pick the easy thing, and Montessori they don't like plastic. They use a lot of blonde wood manipulatables and toys and things. They recreate a lot of adult life, but sort of in a smaller size. So they have pitcher with water, and they use real glass because the children should basically be child adults in a sense. And so the idea is the child picks something easy that they've done before, that he's accomplished before, and he does that, and then he cleans that up and has a little snack and a glass of water. And then he goes and he picks the harder thing that he's not sure that he knows how to do. And he'll spend 2 hours working on that to get it right. And in that way, the children grow and learn. The Montessori method, they talk about errorless learning. So they learn. So your child learns at his own pace. He picks the thing, he puts it back. If he has trouble, there is a teacher sort of standing by if necessary. But it's a very free, open learning environment. And they stress neatness. You have to clean up. You can't just move from one thing to the next thing. It's very organized and very serene in a traditional Montessori classroom. And then finally, we'll just talk briefly about multiple intelligences homeschooling. So this is an idea that Howard Gardner at Harvard University's Project Zero developed. The idea is that everybody's intelligent in his or her own way, and that learning can be easier or less easy or less effective depending on the person who's doing the learning. So I remember tutoring a young woman in calculus, and she came to me begging me just to help her get a D on the final. If she could learn enough to get a D on the final, then she would pass and she wouldn't have to repeat calculus, which really didn't figure into her future anyway. And so I took her on and I tutored her, and she got a B+ on her final because I knew how to teach her, and her professor clearly didn't. And so she wrote me afterwards, and she said that her professor said that he had never seen anybody improve so much Well, he had told her that her highest aspiration should be a D. Shame on him. People learn differently. And so I would absolutely sort of incorporate this idea of multiple intelligences learning into your homeschool. Maybe you have what's known as a kinesthetic learner. So some kids learn best when they're jumping up and down. It goes into their body better because they're jumping up and down. You're trying to say, no, sit in your seat and stop doing that. But the kid's going, but I'm learning. This is good for me. Okay. And some kids learn better hearing. I've got a kid who loves books on tape. He loves the auditory. And then I've got another kid who says those put me to sleep. They put me to sleep too, unless I'm out jogging. So there are visual learners. I tend to be a visual learner. So if somebody calls me and says, can we do blah, 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 I'm like, send it to me in an email, because I need to, if I see it, then it tracks better for me. And so think about it and look at your child and wonder, maybe sitting in a classroom for this young man and being forced to stay seated for the whole time, maybe this isn't the best idea for this child of mine. So maybe school is just, maybe you're going to come to the realization that school is not a good option. Let's see. I think that's about it. So tomorrow we're going to talk about some of the texts that are out there for home education in the case that you want to do a little bit more research maybe. Today we talked about the various homeschooling approaches. So we've got unschooling, we've got the classical, we've got school at home, Waldorf, Charlotte Mason, relaxed or eclectic, and then finally the multiple intelligences is what they're calling it, but I think it's just individualized, right? But the idea is that methodology needs to shift depending on the learning character of the child. So it's up to you to shift the teaching method to best serve the child. You know, I mean, I was lucky. The girl who came to me for calculus tutoring, I could tutor her because I could understand what she was missing. But maybe for somebody else, I'm not going to understand because they need to, I don't know what, to learn calculus. They need a different kind of teaching style. And maybe for a certain thing, it's too hard for you to recalibrate to teach your child that thing. But I would put to you, I mean, if the child is young, work on you. Work on recalibrating you because you're the parent. And if you need to, I can't teach my child dance. I have to take her to a dance class, right? Because I'm not going to teach her dance. So think about it that way. You can get the specialist in, but for the basic stuff, work on you and how you're imparting the information and try to make it fun. All right, so that's my talk for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and tell your friends. I am trying to get the word out. I really appreciate the great notes that I'm getting from you. You can email me at samsorbo.com, and you can sign up there. If you email me, you'll be signed up for the newsletters that I'm sending out. Not very many. They take a long time to put together and stuff. So you won't be hearing from me a whole lot, but do sign up. And lastly, I'll just put a plug in for my book, True Faith. If you're stuck at home, you got plenty of time to read. This is your book. It's just a lot of fun. Embracing Adversity to Live in God's Light. It's strangely appropriate for such a time as this. Forward by Dr. Pat Robertson. There's a special chapter in here from Sean Hannity, who funded our movie Let There Be Light, and lots of stories about Let There Be Light and about getting through trials as a couple with faith. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.